right, so this is the Dalai Mama and her.
Recording is on.
Okay, so this is the Dalai Mama and her son podcast, episode one. Pretty interesting to share all of the crazy experiences that me and my mother have had throughout our awakening journey. And so, m- Mom, you want to start and give people a little bit of background on you and your journey?
Sure. Just wanted to say I'm really excited to be here and talking with you and just sharing some things that have been very meaningful for me. Um, I was trained as a scientist and I really didn't know much about energy work or spiritual exploration until I had a health issue that science couldn't answer. And I couldn't figure out why because, I thought that science had all the answers. And I found out in the middle of my dissertation, my master's thesis research about the fallacy of the scientific method, that there are only participants in the universe, not observers. And the act of observing changes things. And I almost didn't want to finish my research, but my husband just encouraged me to just publish what my findings were. But um, that's what started me looking at other methods of describing the human body, so I could figure out why I had this issue that was very painful, but I couldn't get any resolution with the medical field. So I dived into all kinds of Eastern type philosophies and studied Ayurveda and meditation and yoga, which really helped with the pain.
You like
And
yogurt? Do
uh,
yogurt?
yeah, I do. Usually in the spring, though,
Yeah.
more in the spring. Um, so anyway, the long and the short of it was that I finally came to discover Reiki, and I instantly knew that it was what I wanted to do. I felt a little weird about it at first.
You
I
felt
went to
weird about it. I was the one that had to deal with your creepy hands. I just remember coming home one day and like all of a sudden you just wanted to let me put my creepy hands on you and
I never said creepy. For those of you that don't know, Reiki, it's a gentle touch therapy that accesses universal life force energy, and you can actually help balance the bodies, not just the physical body, but the all the other spiritual light bodies that we have. And you actually had an experience when you were in Florida, didn't you?
yeah.
About distant healing. You don't have to be actually with the person to help the person.
Yeah. So I remember so I guess you started doing Reiki probably when I was around like 13 or maybe somewhere around that age. And I just remember coming home from a soccer game one day and like I had this big like pimple on the inside of my ear. And you're like, let me put my hands on you. I'm like, whatever, mom, sure. And like you popped a pimple. You were like, look, see? I was like, well, mom, you have to do a little bit more than pop a pimple to like impress me. Um, and then I remember like as soon as you were able to start doing distant Reiki healing, you would still always want to work on it. Like, nope, go do it in the other room. Yeah. But yeah, so I guess in a sense, my journey began when your journey began,
Hmm.
you know, because shortly after that, I started getting into like numerology and like figuring out my numbers, and I figured out what my spiritual numbers were, and they followed me my whole life. And 17 was my spiritual number. 71 is the equal and opposite. And then my favorite number in sports was 21. And then I remember when I moved down to Florida, you gave me my social security card. And the first three numbers were 217. So that pretty much solidified it for life. And then, ironically, when we were beginning the podcast today, it was 12:17 p.m. and in Maryland time it was 2:17 p.m. So, but what really opened my eyes to Reiki and that maybe mom isn't so crazy is with my ankle. So I was down in Florida and I was training at a soccer camp, and it was like last day or two of the soccer camp. It was on the weekend, and we were going to go to the beach down, I believe it was at Siesta Keys in Sarasota, Florida. And so we all, like me and the boys, went to the gym, and we're just going to play a pickup game of basketball. And we were playing, and I did this really, kind of like reverse layup. And when I came down, I landed with my ankle on my side like this, and it just snapped and rolled over. At first, I thought it was just just another sprain. I mean, I sprained my ankles a million times, so I limped off and walked to the nurse's office, and they took off my Jordans, and all of a sudden, my ankle just started just swelling and growing, and it got to the size of, like, I would say a baseball at least. And I was like, "Oh, this isn't good." So, then I went to the local doctor there in Bradenton, Florida, and they took X-rays, and I could vividly see two breaks, one kind of catty cornered over the other, in my fibula growth plate, which is on the outside of your leg, just above where your ankle is, right where the bone starts. And the original doctor said, he put me in a hard cast, and he said that, you're going to be lucky if you're like walking and playing soccer by November. And this was in mid June when it happened. I remember it was just when school had let out. Um, so what's that? July, August, September, October. So like 4 or 5 months. And I remember calling you and telling you. And I remember that you immediately started sending to me um, in that moment. And then, so I took the flight back to Maryland. I think later that night, emergency flight or whatever, or last minute flight. And I remember not, I don't think it was the next day. I think it was the day after is when I went back to the doctor in Maryland. And yeah, I believe it was 2 days since the break. There was like a day in between. So we went to the doctor in Maryland, and you were continuing to send to me distantly as well as in person. And at this point, I was just like, all right, mom, whatever, do your crazy voodoo stuff. You know what I mean? And if it works, it works. And we went into the doctor's office, and he took x rays again. And I remember when we were looking at the x rays, you looked at the ones in Florida, and you could see the clear breaks right here and right here. And then you looked at the ones that they took that day, and it almost looked like the on the X-ray graph or whatever, that the lines were like somewhat filled in. It was really eerie, and because of the progress from the initial break to the time that they took that, um, they ended up putting me in a walking cast, and they said you're not going to be able to put any pressure on it for 8 weeks. So just within 2 days, it went from hard cast 4 or 5 months to 8 weeks, no pressure, and then crutches in 2 days. And so, I went home and you just continued to send to me distantly, or, and, I think sometimes you were doing it, live. And then we went back to the doctor. It was on the seventh day since the break. And I remember me being like teenager and like wanted to show off. I remember I walked into the doctor's office without my cast on and a pair of Timberlands. And I still remember the look on the doctor's face. He was just like, just as I got, all right, well, come on in. And sure enough, they gave x rays again, and they said it was just a very severe sprain. Um, and then later that day, I actually went bridge jumping in Brookview Bridge, which is, it's not a big drop into the river, but it's a good 30 feet probably. And we went bridge jumping that night. I literally took my walking cast off and went jumping off the bridge. And probably wasn't the smartest thing, but um,
I didn't know about that.
you know, well, there's a lot of things you didn't know about mom. It's probably better that way. Um, and so, like, at that moment, I was like, okay, maybe mom isn't so crazy. Maybe at that moment, I knew there was something more to reality than what met the eye of the societal norm of what, is portrayed in, I guess you could say, Society 101, which is like the operating system of America. And so from that moment on, I think is the numerology was cool, but there was that experience that was, I would say, the real beginning of my journey. And I wasn't like actively doing it all the time. I mean, I was always doing the numbers thing, but I wasn't actively on my journey till much, till my mid 20s. But yeah, that experience always had a very profound impact on my life. And so,
And my Reiki journey continued to the point where I wanted to teach. I knew that that's where I was headed, and I found it very rewarding to. I've taught over 200 people at the Reiki level one, but probably one of the most personal personally rewarding experiences is when I entombed you for the first time in
mhm.
Sedona, Arizona, at a vortex,
I don't even
at different
remember that.
vortex sites.
I don't even.
Bell Rock was the first one.
Yeah, I don't even remember that. Well, I wasn't in the best state of mind back then either, but
Yeah,
um, it's funny is I didn't even think about it like that, but that's actually where my fiance proposed to me at was Bell Rock too. So
yeah,
maybe
it's a
there's
very
something.
special place for you.
Yeah, it seems like a very special place. Um, but yeah, and then another thing I think is pretty interesting is um, I think the autobiography of a yogi was the first
Mhm.
maybe non-religious spiritual book that you read.
It was, and
Yeah,
it totally. My Reiki teacher, my first Reiki teacher, was the one that told me about it.
yeah. And I find it funny that a lot of interesting people that I resonate with that have been on a journey for, I would say longer than, 10, 15 years or whatever the case is typically where I find that most of their foundation came from. And, Steve Jobs actually, I believe when he passed away, that was the only book that was on his desk was the autobiography of a yogi. And so I think that I remember I came out and and really started to, I guess you could say, experience my journey versus because I went through like the studying phase and research
Mhm.
phase, and then I went through like the experience phase and going out and doing the work. And when I was in that phase is when I read the autobiography of a yogi. And I just remember us talking about it, and you were like, "Yeah, I tried to get you that book a long time ago, but you don't ever listen." I just find that funny.
Eventually, you did.
Yeah, find that funny.
Everybody in their own time. You
Yeah,
can't push the river.
yeah. And then, like, I remember when I used to just talk to you about, like, when I was in my research phase, and I'm like, "Oh, mom, did you know about this?" You're like, "Yeah, I knew about that." And then every now and then I'd be able to surprise you with something that you didn't know.
Hmm.
So, but
I've enjoyed the journey with you in
mm,
the discovery.
yeah. And so, um, but, um, do you want to go into maybe some of the impactful experiences that I guess you could say, um, or maybe one impactful experience? I mean, I know you with your health issue that you had, but was there any confirmational experiences while after you began your journey that kind of was maybe a synchronicity that kind of reconfirmed that you were on the right path?
Well, there's been so many, so it's hard to pick out one. Um,
Let's talk about chapter one.
what's chapter one?
To chapter one of the Dalai Mama's awakening. What would be in chapter one as a confirmation?
Mm. I would say that part of what you learn in Reiki is self treatment. And some of the most amazing spiritual experiences happened when I would self treat myself. And that I would always do that before going to sleep. And I guess it put me into a state where I could have access to or more easily see and receive information from Christed beings, ascended masters, Mother Mary. Quite quite amazing to me. And Reiki also opened me up to having Kundalini experiences.
Yeah,
And what was interesting is my throat chakra. Again, speaking my truth. I tended to be a very quiet person, not be afraid to express, something, a different view. And so that when the Kundalini would rise, it would get stuck at the throat
yeah,
and go back down.
yeah,
Uh, but eventually it would just blow around it and go up. And then after, further time, it would go up smoothly and down smoothly. And that was very profound because I never felt such bliss as I did in those moments.
yeah,
Um, the other amazing exploration is the use of Reiki to connect with
other
nature,
weird people like you.
other people, connect with the animal kingdom, the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom.
Yeah, I remember when you were like, I'm connecting with ayahuasca." I was like, "Oh, mom, that's what's up!" Like, share the wealth. And then of course, I knew you were actually doing ayahuasca. It was connecting with
The
ener-
plant spirit.
the plant
The,
spirit, and then
yeah.
utilizing it that way. I'm like, "Oh, well, it'd be a
Mhm.
lot cooler if you did, mom."
Well, I just had a really just at the solstice this year, the winter solstice, I just had an experience that was just amazing to me about, connecting and talking to my horses, for instance. And My one horse, Aslan, that I've had the longest, she is very much a spiritual being. Well, they're all spiritual beings, but she is more in tune with me since I've had her the
Yeah.
longest. And I had just taken a stone Taoism class with this wonderful woman in Asheville, North Carolina, Sarah Thomas, and her class is just amazing.
Yeah.
But there was one, what I learned with the earth grid work that I've done and the missions that were given to me by the masters and the Divine Mother. I found that a lot of what she talked about techniques I was already doing, which
Yeah.
just validated, you know, that I did get guidance and it was what I was supposed to do. Well, one of the things she talked about was pouring on the land, and it's to bless the land or remove trauma from the land. And I had the idea to do a land blessing with my horses in ceremony. I had never done this before. I talked it over with Aslan, and she was all in for it, doing it. And the next time I saw her at the farm, which I go out every day, she would put her muzzle in my yes hand. I have a yes hand and a no hand. And and when I asked her about it, she put her muzzle in my yes hand. And so I came out, at the solstice with my, bowl of water that I got from the water that was coming from the groundwater that is used to fill their water trough. And I put a little piece of shungite in the water. And the shungite is very good at transforming energies into positive energy. And that's one of the stones that she recommends using for that
Yeah.
purpose. And so um, it was just it was just amazing. I went out in the paddock with my bowl of water, and Aslan and Arwen, my two mares, came to the bowl of water. My gelding Cody just stood, a little bit away from from our circle, which was actually a triangle. They actually came over and made a triangle with me, with their noses pointing in towards the bowl. And of course, I was holding it. And we poured our heart energy into the water, and I talked about different things that uh, would be meaningful to them. And I kept saying, Cody, you can come over. But he stayed. He was watching us, but he just stayed apart. And then it was time to pour the water on the land. And uh, Aslan and Arwen, they brought their noses together like this, crossing. And and after it was all over, Cody came over finally and joined us. And I was talking to one of my Reiki friends about that experience because I just thought it was so cool. And she said, "You were the three mares. You were the three Marys." And Cody was the masculine energy protecting our circle. And he knew that he wasn't supposed to be part of the inner circle, that he was to be the outer circle. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that was so cool. And
Yeah.
so just having experiences like that make you realize that there's so much more to this world than our five senses teach us. And that more and more exploring that world of energy and connection and being one is really where my heart wants to be most of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. And my Kundalini experiences are very similar, except mine, I believe, was in my sacral chakra, which would make sense because of um, what I did in my roaring 20s, I guess you could say. Because when I first was aware that I was having a Kundalini experience, it was during a third eye activation meditation ceremony. And I just felt this, like, it was like almost like this, like, burning, but it wasn't like being lit on fire, like
Mhm.
burning. Like it was like almost like it's hard to describe these things, using linguistics, but it almost felt like a heated blanket, like creeping up my spine. And then all of a sudden, like it got like to my lower mid back and then just went away. Um, and so But then, eventually it did have a full Kundalini experience, which we can delve into those kinds of things later. But yeah, and then another thing I wanted to talk about is just kind of like practical things,
Mhm.
because I think when you begin your journey, see, it was easy for me because I could always talk to you.
Mhm.
Right? I couldn't, even though I couldn't talk to anybody else, I could talk to you. So a lot of people I feel don't have that person that they can talk to kind of like help them like piece together these experiences. And it's almost like, you're born, you learn how to crawl and walk and potty training and stuff like that. And I feel like it resets again if you start going on an awakening journey, that you're starting from that
Mhm.
ground one again as far as spiritually. um, and so some of the things that really helped me was, well, number one, having a crazy mom that put her creepy hands on me and made me actually have an experience, so that was kind of shocking. um, I think had I not had that experience, it would have been a lot longer for me to get there. But when It I came in contact with this guy named Thomas, and he just, like, took me so far down the rabbit hole. I mean, there was times where I felt like my brain was just hurting and twisting after our conversations, but it was just left me with curiosity and more questions, and then also wanted to verify that what he's saying is factual, actually going out there and doing the research. So for me, it was a huge research phase when I really, really began my journey in my mid 20s, and that research phase happened for years. Uh,
Mhm.
and what I think worked for me personally was just quantum physics, because it's scientifically backed. You can't say quantum physics isn't legit. You know what I mean? And once you get into quantum physics, you realize none of that makes any sense at all from a logical perspective. Um, that opens you to the idea that science fact is science fiction, I guess is a neat way to say it.
Mhm.
That, you know, that what meets the eye is illusionary to what the actual fundamental constructs of reality is. And that if you spend some time in quantum physics for a little while, and it'll open your mind up to the potential possibilities of reality. And so for me, that was huge for me, was starting with quantum physics
Mhm.
and then going off into other modalities as far as, uh, meditation, vibration. But even more important than what I think would work is to trust your own inner guidance. We
Mhm.
all have this inner voice, and it's just been with us our whole life. It's like, oh, there's a hot stove, don't touch that when you're 5, right? And then you touch it, right? Or, in your teenage years, you're like, oh, I probably shouldn't go out to this party. And then, you go out and learn the hard way. And it's like with that inner voice has been guiding you throughout your whole life. And typically when you haven't listened to it, something, you know, maybe didn't work out the way you wanted it to. And following that inner guidance and trusting your intuition on what your resonance is automatically going to attract exactly what you need in that moment for that experience to help you get to those next levels of, your own personal journey. Um,
And
and
there's a million different paths on for that journey,
yeah,
everybody has their own unique way of following that path,
mhm,
listening to that voice. And
yeah,
that's what makes it rich to be able to talk to other people about what's your experience and this is what I experienced, and just sharing in a community.
yeah. And I think also another key thing is just to remain as humble as possible. Um, because I went through a little bit of an ego phase because I felt like I knew all these things. You know what I mean? So I think trying to remain as humble as possible throughout your journey will also help you get where you want to go faster.
I think what you should think about is it's not so much the learning, it's the remembering.
Yeah,
Because this ain't your first rodeo. And a
yeah.
lot of the star seeds and
Light
the people
workers.
that on the awakening path have had many, many lives, maybe not just on this planet. And it's all a question of remembering. And that's where, when you hear something and it strikes a chord, it's because you knew that before.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and another thing I want to bring up too, because I think people can feel intimidated about not knowing what they don't know. Um, I went to a book signing, and there was this beautiful older lady, maybe probably around your age, and she was so like upset that she felt like she didn't know and knew enough. You know what I mean? That because that's how left brain we've been structured. Is like you have to know, and it's more important to be and to experience than to know. And I'll give you a perfect example. So I, like I said, I've been on my journey for a long time, and my friend Carmen, and I would, casually bring up random conversations with her. We used to work together, and like she had no idea what I was talking about, but she just listened. And then a few years down the line, she calls me and she's like, "Hey, I need to hang out with you." Okay, so we go hang out, and she's like, she says this, she's like, "I'm gonna help you get to your next level." She's a really good channeler, by the way. Like she's really good at channeling information. And like in the back of my mind, like my ego came out for a split second, like, "What are you gonna show me? I've been on my journey for 10 years." But then I immediately like checked it, you know what I mean? Because I was like, this experience is, I don't believe in coincidences, so I'm going to be open to it and not let my ego deflect it. And so, with her being only on her journey for 2 months and had no idea what was happening to her, like she was going through her awakening and like had to go figure out what was going on. For me, it's like I knew everything and then things happened. But she helped me get to the level of experiencing and being versus knowing. I was in this like knowing phase and then maybe go through like some experiences, but as far as like everyday practical mentality, you know what I mean? She helped me break through to that next level of awakening. So,
Mm-hmm.
and she had only been on her journey for 2 months. I'd been on my journeys, off and on since I was a teenager. So, it doesn't matter what stage you're exactly where you're supposed to be.
Exactly.
And each experience per person is completely different, but equally as relevant based on the person. So, and that's another thing. I think we're getting away from the, I feel like there's like some, there's a little bit of shunning done, in the spiritual community, as far as like this is the way, or like, um, and I'm glad that to see that we're shifting away from that, because it's all individually relevant depending on what your resonance is.
Hmm. Exactly.
So, but yeah, well, it's Christmas Eve, um, and it's the exactly 2 months since Ingrid's passing.
Yeah.
Find it weird that I'm bring up a quick synchronicity real quick. So she passed away on October 24th. My Lyra was born on June 24th. My Kundalini experience happened June 24th. And now it's Christmas Eve, which is December 24th, and it's our first podcast. So I just something about the number 24 that I haven't figured out yet.
Hmm.
So maybe Kobe Bryant lives through this. So, but did you have any final thoughts or things you would like to say?
Well, I just want to end by saying to stay in your heart as much as you can.
Mhm.
Live from your heart. The heart never lies to you. This does,
Yeah,
but the heart is where it's at. And I think I just want to reiterate what you said about everybody's on their path. Their awakening happens at the moment it needs to happen. And when you first, become more conscious, because we're always on a path, but when you're more consciously following that path, there's this feeling of, oh my God, I missed this. And you like you went through your research phase. I did the same thing. Couldn't get enough books.
yeah,
I mean, I have so many books. um, but the most important thing about all of that research is staying in your heart. No matter what happens, it's all good. And it may not look good, you may not understand it, but you be in love and you receive love.
yeah. Funny thing about the heart is actually the first um, thing that's happens when after conception. The first
Hmm.
piece of the embryo that starts forming into what eventually becomes a child, and not the brain, which is what most people probably would have thought of, and so with the heart. At one point, we were all just a heart beating in our mother's womb,
Hmm.
and it's almost like in a Schumann resonance of like
Hmm.
universal life
Love.
force. You know what I mean? I like
Hmm.
people don't know what the Schumann resonance is. It's basically like the vibrational frequency of the earth, and you can measure it.
Hmm.
Um, and then from the heart, comes out the tongue, which
Hmm.
I find very interesting. In the beginning, there was a word, vibration, and the first thing that comes out is the tongue, which creates vibration.
Hmm.
And there's different techniques you can do with the tongue touching the roof of the mouth in a particular way, and that's how you're able to connect through different practices and do different
Hmm.
cool stuff. But I don't know, I just find that very unique. And then that the heart isn't polarized. If you think about the human body, 2 ears, 2 eyes, 2 noses, 2 hands. But if you think about, 2 hemispheres of the brain, if you think about the parts of your body that aren't polarized. So you have the tongue, you have your sexual organ, and you have your heart. And I have there may be others, but those are all. Well,
The
maybe
first eye.
yeah, and pineal gland, yeah, the third eye. So you think about the third eye being like your connection into higher realms of consciousness, your heart being, the loving vibrational frequency, and I guess you could say, um, as far as like with your biosphere, because you have these toroidal fields that emanate from your heart, your light body, that can be scientifically mapped. And then you have the tongue, vibrational creation, linguistics, speaking things into existence. And then you have, your sexual organ, which is the actual, creation of bringing new souls into this earth. I think it's crazy that women can manufacture human bodies. So, made in,
And you were one of those.
huh?
You were one of those.
Um, I would say made in vagina, but so, but you have a website, right?
Yes, it's www.earthstarecology.com.
Or star ecology.
Hmm.
And then what type of things do you do on that website? Like services you offer?
Yeah, I offer distant healing in different modalities. It can involve Reiki, it can involve sound healing. I have plant music that can play during a distant healing session. I do flower essences, and I do now I have um, stone essences that I can make, stone elixirs. And I started tapping into star consciousness. And so I've been making light essences, fire essences of the stars. And so what I do is I intuitively, after a session, I intuitively pick um, a blend for the person that to help hold the energies of what needed to, what was being worked on during the session that helps support them over the next month. And it's modular, you don't have to get everything, but, and I also do things like past life work, uh, soul karma retrieval, all those kinds of things. It's all there on the website.
Nice. And yeah, and I just started working for this company called the Choice Network. And basically, what we do is um, for anybody that's in the holistic industry, Reiki, yoga, tarot, psychic, meditation, classes, mysticism, anything within the holistic realm. It allows people to get insurance like reimbursement without having to adhere to insurance guidelines. And so it allows, for you to be able to offer the same great services for your clients for a less expensive and more affordable rate, and helping crack the matrix. So,
Sign me up.
yeah, it's the choicenetwork.net is the website. And but yeah, so well, happy holidays. Uh,
Happy holidays.
hope everyone has a Merry Christmas and happy holidays. And stay tuned. It's gonna get crazier. You know, but mom, tell one funny story about mom. And so my sister, I wish she could be here to tell the story because she tells it so much better than me. You were talking about like plant sounds or whatever.
Hmm.
And so my sister calls me a while ago, and she's like, yeah, I came downstairs and I just hear this eerie, eerie sound. It's like eerie. And she no, my sister's like, I had no idea like what was going on, but I walked down and there's mom sitting there in the computer room with a glass of wine and a t-shirt and her underwear, like crying, Kelsey, the plants are singing. So, but, yeah,
Next time, maybe I'll hook up my singer so you can
I'm
experience
I'm
it too.
okay, thank you. You can do that distantly too. I prefer it. So, all right, mom. Well, I love you, and
Uh,
we'll do this again sometime soon.
all right. Love you too. Merry Christmas.
All right.